So we are going to begin Reed's novel Straight is the Gate, and I already gave you some material to familiarize yourself with Reed and his works. So I will not repeat the same thing here, but of course you must have noticed the salient points that Reed got the Nobel in Literature in 1947, and he was a versatile writer, wrote in many genres, essays, novels, diaries, journals, letters, and he was also quite experimental in his writing. Apart from his literary work, he was also very well known for his outstanding views on sexuality and feminism, other aspects of life. So he was not some kind of a cloistered writer. He was a Protestant by birth, and therefore one may say did not belong to the mainstream Catholic community. So he delves deep into the psychology and the aberrations. This particular novel, Straight is the Gate, is one may say an extraordinary novel, an outstanding novel, because nobody could have thought of a love story like this, where both the hero and the heroine love each other, but the heroine simply wastes away being a believer in a religious dogma. So whether that is true in real life or not, we cannot say. Often real life is more surprising than fiction, as we all know. And therefore, Reed surprises us with this fiction, which borders on a very subversive and unnoticed psychological aberrations of people. Some critic has imagined that this represents the failed marriage of Reed. He separated from his wife and had affairs with other women and also with a boy. The inadequacy in this novel, it seems that the inadequacy was with the heroine Elisa. But this particular critic, who sees a reflection of Reed's own relationship with his wife in this novel, suggests that the inadequacy was with Jerome himself, or Reed himself in his personal life. So on the matter of sexuality, it is important because in this novel and in many other works, Corydon, for example, is his most outstanding work on his views on sexuality. Reed has kind of upheld and favored, we may say, homosexuality, and even drew a line between sodomy and pederasty. So he called himself a pederast, that is one who loves boys, which he said was much rare. sodomy or homosexuality with adults was much more common. This novel is, one may say, a counterpart of his other novel, The Immoralist, which was published in 1902, and this novel was published in 1909. So, in The Immoralist, Gide explored the excesses of vice, the excesses of immorality, but lest one thinks of him as a champion of immorality, he also writes a novel of the other extreme kind. Straight is the Gate is a novel which depicts the excesses of morality, we may say, the excesses of virtue. So as we know that excess is never good. Any kind of excess always leads to some kind of failure and heartbreak. The epigraph to this novel refers to the central image in this novel of the gate, the straight gate or the narrow. This quotation is from Luke. Strive to enter in at the straight gate. So, a saying of Christ, that is, the virtuous man should always attempt to enter through the narrow gate. The narrow gate leads to heaven. In this novel, Elisa and Jerome, they are cousins. They have love from childhood. From childhood they are in love with each other. And Jerome always has the impression that Elisa at some point will marry him. Elisa, on the other hand, has a secret life. That secret life is her fascination with religion, particularly one kind of Protestant religion in France called Jansenism. And one of the main authors of this movement was Pascal. His famous book was Essays. So both Elisa and Jerome, they had propensity towards literature, towards art, and they would often discuss among themselves literary works or read out, important passages or sometimes poems, recite them. But when Elisa developed this fascination with this brand of religion and with Pascal's writings, sorry, not essays, les pensées, the pensées of Pascal. Pensée means thought, and there should be an acute accent on the second E. I was wondering why I wrote essays, pensée. Okay. So Elisa does not share with Jerome that she was reading Pascal or she was being moved by this idea. Now both Elisa and Jerome also thought that they were mutually helping each other in a spiritual journey. But Jerome never thought that spiritual journey would mean a lack of consumption in marriage. But Elisa believed that there will be no marriage because of her belief in Jansenism. Since Jerome did not know that, therefore to him Alyssa appears to be very puzzling. Now we'll have to speak about the different love affairs that we find in this novel. So we usually know of triangular love affairs where one party has to go unsatisfied. But here we find more than that. We have several lovers here pursuing one another in a circle. Most of them are not do not get their fulfillment. So Alyssa has a sister, Juliet. Juliet is Jerome's age. Alyssa is 2 years older. Juliet is more beautiful than Alyssa, and she loves Jerome, but Jerome doesn't know it, or doesn't have the capacity to understand the unspoken love, the unannounced love of Juliet. But Alyssa overhears their conversation, and Alyssa learns that Juliet loves Jerome. So at the outset, Alyssa doesn't want to be an obstacle in Juliet's happiness. So she thought of sacrificing her love for Jerome and wanted Juliet to marry Jerome. There is a character, Abel Vautier, who is another cousin, and this Abel Vautier, another young man, Jerome's friend, he loves Juliet, and he is very bold in the affairs of love, unlike Jerome, who never presses or urges Alyssa. So Abel decides to bring everything to a conclusion and pressurizes Juliet, proposes to her, and then Juliet rejects him, and Abel comes to know that Juliet loves Jerome. Therefore, he tells Jerome that you are blind, you cannot see that Juliet loves you. And Jerome learns from Abel about Juliet's love. But of course he can do nothing about it because he loves Alyssa. However, what Alyssa wanted, that Jerome and Juliet should be married, that doesn't happen either. The family finds a suitable husband for Juliet, and Juliet is married to that person. So at the outset, Juliet does not love him, but later comes to love him. So we have this kind of a quadrangular or more situation here. The lovers, Jerome, Alyssa, Juliet, Abel, and Juliet's husband. So there are 5 lovers. Among them, Jerome loves Alyssa, and Alyssa reciprocates his love, but they cannot marry or do not marry. Juliet loves Jerome, but Jerome does not reciprocate her love. So that is also not fulfilled. Abel loves Juliet, but Juliet doesn't love him, so Abel is rejected. And Juliet's husband loves her, but Juliet does not love him at the outset. But later she comes to accept him, has children with him. But then there is a twist. At the end of the novel, Jerome comes to meet Juliet. Elisa dies at the age of 25. She wastes herself away by suppressing or repressing all her desires. She even turns away from the life of literature and arts. She becomes extremely religious and so on. So she dies, and Jerome comes to meet Juliet after many years, and then he discovers that Juliet still loves him. Therefore, can we really say that Juliet's love was fulfilled? That Juliet, being happily married with her husband, had a life of fulfillment? Perhaps not. So the novel kind of ends by raising these questions rather than solving the questions, and it becomes difficult to get the point of all of this. Is there a point? Is there a message in this novel? We cannot pinpoint if there is one. So the novel is as complex as is life. So I was telling you about the experimental technique of Gide. Even in this novel we do not find one straight narrative, but the novel can be divided, or we can discern the following. This is the edition I am following. I hope you have a text with you. This is the Penguin edition.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So from page 9 to page 66 of this edition, we have Jerome's narration. So the whole story is being narrated by Jerome after the events, much after the events. So an adult Jerome, and we may say mature Jerome, narrates the story of his early life. Then from page 66 to 70, we have this situation where Elisa is separated from Jerome. Jerome goes away on a business trip, and Elisa and Jerome, they keep writing letters to each other. So we have Elisa's letters from page 66 to 90. Jerome's trip to Italy. Then at some point the letters become less and less frequent, and finally Elisa stops writing and Jerome also stops writing. And Elisa kept a journal. When at the end of the novel Jerome comes to meet Juliet, then Juliet gives him Elisa's journal. And by reading her journal, Jerome comes to know a few things. Number one, that Elisa loved him as physically and sensually as any young girl. So even though Elisa appeared to be very religious minded and not at all carnal, but her love for Jerome was prompted by desire, by sexual desire. There is no doubt about that. Jerome comes to know of it by reading the journal. The second thing that Jerome comes to know is that Elisa was influenced by Pascal's writings. She never told Jerome about this. So this secret life of Elisa uh, is revealed before his eyes, and the idea that Elisa wanted Jerome to succeed spiritually, and she thought that if she removed herself from the scene, then Jerome can be a saint. As you may know that Jerome is the name of a saint. Saint Jerome, the translator of the Vulgate, the Latin Bible. So, the image of the straight gate, the narrow gate. Elisa thought that the two of them cannot pass through that gate. Only one of them will be able to pass through it. And she makes a sacrifice, and she wants Jerome to pass through the gate and become a saint. So by reading of a journal, Jerome comes to know that Elisa ultimately died without faith. That is, even though she abandoned the world for a religious, ideology, ultimately she did not feel that she had faith in God. She had true faith. So that is another non-fulfillment. Therefore, she was neither fulfilled in life, in her love life, nor was she fulfilled in her religious life. And whether any of the characters get fulfillment or satisfaction in their lives, that is the question. So we will ultimately arrive at those questions, but before that we have to read the novel. So I kind of summarize the whole thing for you. I hope that helps. I normally do not do it because it is like storytelling, but nevertheless I hope it puts things in a perspective. So the pages 108 to 125, these are Elisa's journal, taken from Elisa's journal. So in this thin novel, the thinness indicates that it is some kind of a modern novel. We have Jerome's narration, letters, the epistolary form, and journals. Now, journal was Reed's favorite form of writing, and he himself kept journal from his boyhood, and later he publishes his journals in 4 volumes, and these journals were his most favorite publication, most favorite book that he published. So in this novel also you find the journal form. In many of his novels, Reed uses the journal form. The novel begins like this. Some people might have made a book out of it, but the story I am going to tell is one which took all my strength to live and over which I spent all my virtue. So it is a denial that it is a book. So you can realize that it is the trick of the novelist, or this is the old trick that we have seen from the day the novel goes as a genre, the truth claim. So beginning from Fielding, Richardson and so on, the novelists always claim that it is the true story, something that really happened. So the denial of fictionality is a trick or a technique in order to win the reader's confidence, the reader's conviction that what they are going to read, that is not fiction but that is true. So others would have made a book out of this whole experience, but I didn't. That is what Jerome suggests. So it is Jerome's recollection at the beginning, So I shall set down my recollections quite simply, and if in places they are ragged, I shall have recourse to no invention, and neither patch nor connect them. Any effort I might make to dress them up would take away the last pleasure I hope to get in telling them. That is, it is raw data. There is no polish on it, no editorial improvements. That is how the author wants to present this story, which he claims is the true experience. It begins with Jerome's loss of his father at the age of 12, and then as there was nothing to keep my mother at Le Havre, where my father had to practice as a doctor, she decided to go to Paris, where she thought I should be better able to finish my education. She took a small apartment near the Luxembourg. I suppose it is the Luxembourg Garden in Paris, and Miss Ashburton came to live with us. Miss Flora Ashburton, who had no relations of her own, had begun by being my mother's governess. She afterwards became her companion and later on her friend. So her mother was a widow from the age when he was 12, and she was conventional, conservative kind of a woman, and she mourned the death of her husband for many years. But every person has the desire to transcend the sadness, or the period of mourning should be over at some point. And then one day my mother changed the black ribbon in her mourning cap for a mauve one. So she wore a colorful ribbon on her cap, suggesting that her mourning period is over. "Oh, Mama," I cried, "that color doesn't suit you at all." The next morning the black ribbon was back again. So the son's intervention did not allow the mother to sport a colorful ribbon, which meant that she went back to her life of mourning and could not expect any suitor or any new life. So here is an English governess, a French lady, and a young boy. About the middle of June we would start for Fonguesmar in the neighborhood of Le Havre, where we used to spend the summer every year at my uncle Bucolin's. So the place near Le Havre. Le Havre is a big city, I think a port town. There is a place called Fonguesmar, a small place where his uncle Bucolin lived. So the mother would take Jerome to his uncle's place at Fonguesmar, and it is there that Elisa also lived. And the name Fonguesmar is also significant in the sense that it means fungus. So something that grows and decays very quickly, right? So the affair that develops at Fonguesmar, that grows and decays, it does not have any fulfillment. Then there is a garden there, and this garden is very symptomatic. It is like the Garden of Eden, where this innocent love affair blooms. Standing in a garden which is neither very large nor very fine, and which has nothing special to distinguish it from a number of other Normandy gardens, the Bucolin's house, a white two-storied building, resembles a great many country houses of the century before last. So we have a description of the garden, and this description is important because many important events take place in the garden, and particularly there is a place in the garden below the stairs. One has to climb down a few stairs to the garden. The place below the stairs is a blind spot. So anybody standing there or sitting there would be able to hear the conversation that is going on in the garden, but will not be seen. And that gives the opportunity of many overhearings, which you know are useful tools for a novelist. Alright. And the garden also has a small gate or a wicket, a small gate, which takes up a physical, symbolism of the straight gate in the Bible, the narrow gate. So here is this description. There are two walks in the garden. One of them they call the dark walk. My cousins used to call it the dark walk and would not venture along it after twilight. These two paths led to the kitchen garden, which continues the flower garden on a lower level, and which you reach by a small flight of steps. Then at the bottom of the kitchen garden, a little gate with a secret fastening leads on the other side of the wall to a coppice in which the beech avenue terminates right and left. As one stands on the doorstep of the west front, one can look over the top of this clump of trees to the plateau beyond with its admirable clothing of crops. On the horizon, at no great distance, can be seen the church of a little village, and when the air is still, the smoke rising from half a dozen houses. So we have here a pastoral landscape in Normandy, small cottages with chimneys and smoke coming out of the chimneys. And this beautiful garden, there is the kitchen garden, there is the floral garden. This beautiful garden creates a backdrop or a context, and the little gate that takes up a symbolism. Every fine summer evening after dinner, we used to go down to the lower garden, that is the floral garden, by the flight of steps. We went out by the little secret gate and walked as far as a bench in the avenue, from which there was a view over the country. There, near the thatched roof of a deserted marl pit, my uncle, my mother, and Miss Ashburton would sit down. Before us, the little valley filled with mist, and over the distant woods we watched the sky turn golden. When we came in, we found my aunt in the drawing room. She hardly ever went out with us. For us children, the evening ended here, but very often we were still reading in our rooms when we heard our elders go up to bed. Now, after the description of the garden comes the characters. Characters are introduced. So we are already introduced to the uncle and the aunt. Now they are children. My cousin, almost every hour of the day which we did not spend in the garden, we spent in the schoolroom, my uncle's study, in which some school desks had been placed for us. My cousin Robert and I walked side by side. Behind us were Juliet and Elisa. So the three children, or the three cousins, Juliet, Elisa and Robert. Among them, Robert was a kind of a loser. He was not good at anything. Elisa was 2 years older than I, and Juliet 1 year younger. Robert was the youngest of us four. Now, a reference to Jerome's father's death. It was certainly the year of my father's death. My recollection is confirmed by a conversation which I remember took place between my mother and Miss Ashburton immediately after our arrival. My mother was indignant that she had not gone into mourning or had gone out again. That is, they were talking about their aunt. So the aunt was not in mourning, even though her brother, that is Jerome's father, died. So she was not in mourning and gone out again so soon. To tell the truth, it was as impossible for me to imagine Aunt Bucolan dressed in black as my mother in colors. Now here we have an important character, Jerome's aunt and Elisa's mother, Lucille Bucolan. She was very different from everybody else. She was from she was a Creole from Martinique, and she wore colorful dresses, and she was not to be confined to home for very long because she was pleasure loving, and she was not loyal to her husband. She received a lover in her own house, and before her children she mocked their father, Jerome's uncle. And finally, this lover was a lieutenant. Finally, she runs away with him, causing enormous trauma to the family and to Elisa particularly. And this event is one of the explanations why Elisa withdrew from life, and her mother's sinfulness traumatized her so much that she, in reaction, wanted to be excessively religious. So here is the description. Jerome says that I cannot think of her in black. The day of our arrival, Lucille Bucolan, as far as I can remember, was wearing a muslin gown. Miss Ashburton, conciliatory as ever, was trying to calm my mother. After all, she argued timidly, White is mourning too. And do you call that red shawl she has round her shoulders mourning too? Flora, I am ashamed of you, cried my mother. It was only during the holidays that I saw my aunt, and no doubt the warm summer weather was the reason of her wearing the transparent low-necked bodices in which I always remember her. So, from her dresses, it was clear that she wanted to expose her beauty as much as possible to people. And we have to remember that this happens in a conservative French household. But still more than brilliant, the brilliant color of the scarves which she used to throw over her bare shoulders, it was my aunt's low necks that shocked my mother. His mother was very conservative. We have seen she mourned her husband's death for a very long time and went back to it again. So we see here the references to low-necked bodices, bare shoulder. It is quite clear that the author wants the reader to realize the role of the flesh in human affairs. So sensuality, sexuality, these are things which cannot be suppressed or repressed for long. So even in the midst of a conservative household, it is not impossible that somebody would be different, would be more prone to sexual desire than others. But we may say that the novel is written in a social matrix, and Gide plays, playfully manipulates the reactions of his readers, as he knows that many of his readers would come from the middle classes. So their idea of morality, and particularly the Protestants. So in this novel we see that the first we see that sensuality, sexuality, they do not find any kind of fulfillment in this novel. And we see Lucille Buccola is kind of criticized directly or indirectly for her attitude. Secondly, we see in this novel a lot of religious thought or ideology, or at least, characters apparently being moved by religion, and their worldly lives are frustrated because of these religious attitudes. So much so that Gides's Roman Catholic friends thought that this was his conversion novel, that Gides was going to be converted from Protestantism to Roman Catholicism, which of course he was not. And Gides lamented that his friends interpreted the novel in this manner. Now I am talking and talking. Do you have any comments to make? Or any questions?
No, sir, it's clear till now.
No, sir. No, sir, there are no questions.
Alright. So if you have any questions, you can stop me and ask, no problem. Now, a description of the aunt, Lucille Buccola. She was very beautiful. I still have by me a little portrait of her in which I can see her as she then was, looking so young that she might have been taken for the elder sister of her daughters. Sitting sideways in an attitude which was habitual to her, her head leaning on her left hand, her little finger carved rather affectedly towards her lip. A large mesh net confines the masses of her curly hair, which fall half uncoiled upon her neck. So, as you know that hair is a sign of sensuality. In the opening of her bodice, a locket of Italian mosaic hangs from a loosely tied black velvet neck ribbon. Her black velvet sash with its wide floating bow, her broad-brimmed soft straw hat, which is dangling from the back of her chair, everything adds to the childishness of her appearance. Her right hand hangs by her side, holding a shut book. This is very curious. So, the portrait of Lucille, in every way she appears to be very beautiful, charming, fashionable. All the accessories of fashion are there, and she is holding a shut book in her hand, which indicated that at that time in France there was some pretension of intellectuality or intellectualism among ladies. And as we know that in France the famous salons developed in the 18th century, and the ladies who got together or invited poets, writers in their salons, artists. So some kind of intellectual conversation would always take place. Therefore, like characters like Madame de Sévigné and others. Therefore, the book becomes an accessory, a fashion accessory to a well-dressed woman. But the short book says that it is never read. Lucille Buccola came from a West Indian family. She had either never known her parents or lost them very early. My mother told me later that when she was left an orphan, or possibly even deserted, she was taken in by Pastor Vautier and his wife, who at that time had no children of their own. So a kind pastor adopts Lucille and brings her up when they did not have any children of their own. But later they have a number of children, and one of their children was Abel Gautier, who becomes Jerome's friend. The Gautier and the Bucolin used to see a good deal of each other. Okay. They left Martinique soon after, taking her with them to Le Havre, where the Bucolins settled. The Gautier and Bucolin used to see each other. My uncle was at that time employed in a bank abroad, and it was only 3 years later, when he came home to stay with his people, that he saw little Lucille. So Lucille was married at the age of 16 years to Jerome's uncle. He fell in love with her and at once asked her to marry him, to the great grief of his parents and of my mother. Why? Because nobody probably knew her parentage. So his parents didn't want their son to marry somebody whose origins are not known. In the meantime, Madame Gautier had her 2 children. She was beginning to be anxious as to the influence of their adopted sister, that Lucille would have bad influence on the other children, whose character was developing more and more oddly every month, might have overed them. The household, moreover, was in straitened circumstances, and so on. So Miss Lucille was becoming terribly embarrassing. I can say nothing of Madame Gautier. She died in giving birth to a 4th child, who was about my own age and who afterwards became my friend. So, from Jerome's narration, we learn about Lucille, and the representation of Lucille is not very sympathetic. What do you say? Is it sympathetic? Okay.
No, sir.
Right. So through this narration, the author is actually prejudicing the reader against Lucille. Now, had Gide not written from this quasi-religious point of view, he might have tried to prejudice the author the reader in the other direction. But in every novel he has a strategy, a new strategy. So this novel is the very counterpart of the Immoralist, where the author does not mind at all to represent a lot of immoral acts in a neutral manner. Some more discussion or description of Lucille. Jerome was always puzzled by looking at her. She had a handkerchief which she used to wipe her forehead. This handkerchief of hers filled me with wonder because of its fineness and its scent, which seemed more like the perfume of a fruit than of a flower. Sometimes she would draw from her waist a minute mirror with a sliding silver lid. So another accessory, a mirror, which hung with various other objects from her watch chain. She would look at herself, wet her finger at her lips, and then moisten the corner of her eyes. She used often to hold a book, but it was almost always shut. So the mirror and the book, they are all fashion accessories, and her narcissistic nature is described here. A tortoiseshell bookmarker was stuck between its pages. If you came near her, she did not turn from the contemplation of her dreams to look at you. Often from her careless or tired hand, from the back of the sofa or from a fold-over dress, her handkerchief would drop to the ground, or her book, or a flower maybe, or the bookmarker. So something or the other is always dropping. One day when I picked up her book, this is a childish memory, I am telling you, I blushed to see it was a book of poetry. Now can you tell me, why should Jerome blush to see that the book was a book of poetry. So we may imagine that a book of poetry in that household was considered to be sinful. So instead of being a religious book, it was a book of poetry, maybe of love poetry. The narration continues, and both Jerome's mother and Miss Ashburton were afraid of Lucille. Lucille Bucolin, I wish I no longer bore you malice. I wish I could forget for a moment how much harm you did. At any rate, I will try to speak of you without anger. So here suddenly comes a comment from the adult Jerome, who says that Lucille, I have your memory and I will never forget that you were responsible for enormous harm. Now, one critic has commented that this is an allusion to the fact that one day Lucille was speaking to Jerome and unbuttoned one of the buttons of his shirt, which the suggestion is kind of corrupted Jerome because it opened the world of sensuality to him. And the critic suggests that this comment, how much harm you did, refers to that event. But I do not agree with that. I think that it refers to the harm that Lucille had done to his daughter Alyssa, because it is Alyssa's trauma, after experiencing or witnessing the betrayal of her father by her mother, that led her to such an extreme religious point of view. And because of that, Alyssa's life was a failure, and also Jerome did not get fulfillment. So probably this sentence refers to that harm, which is a much bigger harm, much greater harm than any attempt on young Jerome's virtue.